Have you ever noticed how a week can exhaust you before it even begins? Have you ever felt Monday's pressure on Sunday night, long before the alarm clock rings? What if I told you that one ancient passage of Scripture contains a secret that can completely change the way you walk into the next 7 days? Most people read it and miss it. Most people hear it and move on. But if you stay with me for the next few moments, what you're about to hear could replace your anxiety with peace, your pressure with purpose, and your fear with faith. Because before this week begins pulling at your attention, before responsibilities start demanding your energy, before the noise of the world rushes in and tries to steal your focus, God wants to speak something powerful to your heart. Good morning, my friend. Before you check your schedule, before you open your inbox, before you think about everything waiting for you tomorrow, I want you to pause right here, just for a moment. Breathe deeply. Slow your thoughts. Let your shoulders relax. Allow yourself to become fully present in this moment, because what we're about to do is far more important than preparing for your week. We're going to prepare your heart. So many people enter a new week already defeated. They haven't even faced Monday yet, but they're already carrying Monday's stress. They haven't even had the conversation yet, but they're already rehearsing every possible negative outcome. They haven't encountered the challenge yet, but they're already exhausted by imagining it. And little by little, worry begins to steal the strength that God intended for today. Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you're thinking about the responsibilities waiting for you. Maybe you're carrying financial pressure. Maybe there's uncertainty surrounding your future. Maybe there's a relationship that feels strained. Maybe there are decisions you need to make, answers you don't have, or burdens you've been carrying for far too long. You know what's interesting? Most of the things we worry about never happen the way we imagine they will. Yet anxiety has a way of convincing us that disaster is inevitable. It whispers that we're alone. It whispers that we're behind. It whispers that we're not enough. It whispers that if we don't control everything, everything will fall apart. And if we're not careful, we begin believing those whispers. But today, before this week begins, God is inviting you into something different. Not panic, not pressure, not performance. Peace. The kind of peace that isn't dependent on circumstances. The kind of peace that remains steady even when life isn't. The kind of peace that comes from knowing that God is already standing in every tomorrow you're worried about today. That's why we're turning our hearts towards Psalm 37. This psalm wasn't written by a man living an easy life. It wasn't written by someone who had never experienced hardship. It wasn't written by someone who had all the answers. It was written by David. And when David wrote these words, he wasn't a young shepherd boy anymore. He wasn't standing before Goliath. He wasn't the passionate young warrior running toward giants. No. This was David after years of battles, years of victories, years of disappointments, years of leadership, years of waiting, years of learning what it means to trust God when circumstances make no sense. And isn't that exactly what many of us need? Not advice from someone who's never struggled. Not encouragement from someone who's never waited, but wisdom from someone who has walked through the fire and discovered that God remains faithful on the other side. David had seen kingdoms rise and fall. He had watched people prosper through dishonesty. He had experienced betrayal from those closest to him. He had endured seasons where God's promises seemed delayed. And yet after all those years, After all those experiences, he arrives at a profound conclusion. He says, "Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong." Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, "Do not face difficulties." He doesn't say, "Problems won't come." He doesn't say, "Life will always be fair." Instead, he addresses something much deeper. He addresses our tendency to fret. That word is important, because fretting isn't always obvious. Sometimes fretting doesn't look like panic. Sometimes it looks like constantly checking your phone. Sometimes it looks like replaying conversations in your head. Sometimes it looks like lying awake at night, thinking about problems you can't solve. Sometimes it looks like carrying a low-grade anxiety that hums beneath everything you do. You smile. You work. You function. You keep moving. But underneath it all, there's tension. A quiet restlessness. A constant sense that something might go wrong. David says, don't live there. Don't build your home in anxiety. Don't let worry become your permanent address. Don't allow fear to steal your peace before anything has even happened. Why? Because worry promises control, but never delivers it. Think about that. Has worry ever solved a problem? Has anxiety ever added a single hour to your life? Has overthinking ever guaranteed a positive outcome? No. It only steals today's strength while pretending to protect tomorrow. That's why David immediately follows his warning with an invitation. Trust in the Lord and do good. Simple words, yet life-changing words. Trust in the Lord, not in your own understanding, not in your ability to predict the future, not in your ability to manage every outcome. Trust in the Lord, because trust is the antidote to anxiety. You cannot simultaneously trust God completely and be controlled by fear. One will eventually replace the other. And this is where many people struggle. We say we trust God, but then we spend all day worrying. We say God is in control, but then we try to control everything ourselves. We say we believe in His promises, but then we act as though everything depends entirely on us. David challenges us to live differently. Trust in the Lord, not occasionally, not when it's convenient, not only when things are going well. Trust Him consistently. Trust Him completely. Trust Him even when you don't understand. Trust Him when prayers seem unanswered. Trust Him when doors remain closed. Trust Him when the path ahead looks unclear. Trust Him when circumstances don't match your expectations. Because true trust isn't proven when everything makes sense. True trust is proven when nothing does. And then David adds something powerful. Trust in the Lord and do good. Notice the balance. Trust doesn't mean inactivity. Trust doesn't mean sitting around waiting for life to happen. Trust doesn't mean avoiding responsibility. God never calls us to passive faith. He calls us to active faith. Trust in the Lord and do good. Keep showing up. Keep being faithful. Keep doing what's right. Keep loving people. Keep serving. Keep praying. Keep obeying. Keep moving forward. Trust God with what you cannot control while faithfully stewarding what you can. That is mature faith. That is spiritual stability. That is how you enter a new week with confidence. Because here's what many people don't realize. Most of our stress comes from trying to carry responsibilities God never asked us to carry. We try to manage outcomes. We try to control other people's opinions. We try to guarantee success. We try to eliminate uncertainty. And in doing so, we exhaust ourselves. But God never asked you to carry the future. He asked you to trust Him with it. He never asked you to control every outcome. He asked you to obey Him one step at a time. He never asked you to figure everything out. He asked you to follow Him. There's freedom in that. Real freedom. Because suddenly the pressure lifts. Suddenly you realize that your job is faithfulness, not omniscience. Your responsibility is obedience, not control. Your calling is trust, not certainty. And that's exactly what David is teaching us. As you prepare to step into this week, there will be things you cannot predict. There will be conversations you cannot script. There will be circumstances you cannot control. There will be challenges you cannot avoid. But there is something you can do. You can trust. You can pray. You can obey. You can remain faithful. And you can rest in the confidence that God is already ahead of you. Think about that for a moment. Before Monday arrives, God is already there. Before the meeting begins, God is already there. Before the decision is made, God is already there. Before the challenge appears, God is already there. Nothing catches Him by surprise. Nothing confuses Him. Nothing overwhelms Him. Nothing threatens His plans. The thing keeping you awake at night is not keeping God awake. The situation you're worried about is not beyond His reach. The answer you're searching for is not hidden from Him. He sees the entire picture, the beginning, the middle, the end. And because He sees what you cannot see, you can trust Him even when you don't understand. My friend, if you carry nothing else from this message today, carry this truth. You do not have to enter this week carrying the weight of the entire week. You only need enough grace for this moment. Tomorrow's grace will arrive tomorrow. Monday's strength will arrive Monday. Tuesday's wisdom will arrive Tuesday. God has never asked you to live 7 days at once. He asks you to trust Him one day at a time, one prayer at a time, one step at a time, one act of faith at a time. And when you do, something remarkable begins to happen. The anxiety starts losing its grip. The pressure begins to lift. The noise becomes quieter. The fear becomes weaker. Not because your circumstances changed, but because your perspective changed. You stop looking at your week through the lens of your limitations and start looking at it through the lens of God's faithfulness. And that changes everything. Because the God who carried you through every previous challenge is the same God who will carry you through this one. The God who provided before will provide again. The God who guided before will guide again. The God who strengthened before will strengthen again. The God who opened doors before will open doors again. He has not changed. His faithfulness has not changed. His power has not changed. His promises have not changed. And because He has not changed, your confidence does not have to change either. So before this week begins demanding your attention, make a decision. Decide that you will trust God more than your fears. Decide that you will pray more than you panic. Decide that you will focus on faithfulness rather than outcomes. Decide that you will enter this week not as a victim of circumstances, but as a child of God walking confidently under His care. Because Psalm 37 is about to reveal a life-changing principle that can transform the way you handle uncertainty, waiting, pressure, and fear. And in the next part, we're going to uncover the powerful secret hidden in David's words, what it truly means to commit your way to the Lord, and why most believers never fully experience the peace that comes from complete surrender. There is a burden many people carry every day without even realizing it. It follows them into the morning. It sits beside them at work. It rides home with them in the evening. It lies beside them in bed at night. They carry it everywhere. And the strangest part is this: God never asked them to carry it. The burden is not responsibility. The burden is not hard work. The burden is not faithfulness. The burden is control. The exhausting attempt to manage outcomes that belong to God. The constant pressure to figure everything out. The relentless effort to make sure nothing goes wrong. The overwhelming need to hold together things that were never theirs to hold in the first place. And if we're honest, most of us know exactly what that feels like. We know what it's like to lie awake at night rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet. We know what it's like to imagine worst-case scenarios. We know what it's like to replay problems over and over in our minds, as though thinking about them long enough will somehow solve them. We know what it's like to carry tomorrow's burdens before tomorrow even arrives. But Psalm 37 offers a different way, a better way, a way that replaces striving with surrender, a way that exchanges anxiety for peace, a way that allows you to walk through uncertainty without being crushed by it. David writes, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do this." At first glance, those words seem simple, almost too simple. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him. But hidden within those words is a truth powerful enough to transform your entire life. The Hebrew word translated as commit is a fascinating word. It is the word galal, and it literally means to roll. Think about that for a moment. David is painting a picture. Imagine carrying an enormous stone, a massive boulder. Its weight is crushing your shoulders. Your arms ache. Your back is strained. Your energy is disappearing. Every step becomes harder than the last. And then someone stronger than you says, "Roll it onto me." Not because the burden isn't real. Not because it isn't heavy. Not because it doesn't matter. But because they are strong enough to carry what you cannot. That is the picture David wants you to see. God is saying, stop trying to carry what I never asked you to carry. Roll it onto me. Roll the burden onto me. Roll the outcome onto me. Roll the uncertainty onto me. Roll the future onto me. Roll the pressure onto me. Roll the fear onto me. Roll the entire week onto me. Yet so many of us resist doing exactly that. Why? Because surrender feels risky. Control feels safer, even though control is often an illusion. We convince ourselves that if we worry enough, prepare enough, analyze enough, and think enough, then somehow we can guarantee a certain outcome. But life doesn't work that way. You can do everything right and still face disappointment. You can prepare perfectly and still encounter challenges. You can make wise decisions and still experience uncertainty. The truth is that control has limits, but God does not. And there comes a moment in every believer's life when they must decide: will I trust my ability to control things? Or will I trust God's ability to lead me? That decision changes everything. Because surrender is not weakness. A surrender is faith. It is looking at a situation honestly and saying, God, this matters to me. I care deeply about this. I will do my part faithfully, but I refuse to carry a burden that belongs to you. That's biblical surrender. Not giving up. Not quitting. Not becoming passive. Trusting. There's a difference. Many people think surrender means sitting still and doing nothing. But that isn't what Psalm 37 teaches. Notice the sequence. Trust in the Lord and do good. Not trust and quit. Trust and do good. Trust and keep moving. Trust and keep obeying. Trust and keep serving. Trust and keep showing up. Faith doesn't eliminate action. Faith transforms the motivation behind action. Instead of working from anxiety, you work from peace. Instead of serving from fear, you serve from trust. Instead of striving for approval, you walk in confidence. The action remains. The burden disappears. And that changes everything. Imagine walking into a difficult meeting this week. Most people walk in carrying multiple burdens. What if they don't agree with me? What if I say the wrong thing? What if this goes badly? What if I fail? Those questions create pressure. Pressure creates fear. Fear creates anxiety. Anxiety steals clarity. Suddenly you're trying to control everyone's response before the conversation even begins. But surrender looks different. A surrender says, Lord, I'll prepare. I'll pray. I'll seek wisdom. I'll speak truthfully. I'll act with integrity. And then I'll leave the outcome with you. Do you see the difference? The faithful action remains. The burden doesn't. That is freedom. Real freedom. And it's available to you right now. Not next month. Not after your problems disappear. Not after everything makes sense. Right now, the moment you choose to release what belongs to God. One of the greatest lies anxiety tells us is that worrying is productive. It convinces us that stress equals responsibility. It tells us that if we're not worried, we must not care. But that's not true. You can care deeply without carrying anxiety. Jesus himself demonstrated this. No one cared more than Jesus. No one loved more deeply. No one carried greater responsibility. Yet he walked in perfect peace. Why? Because he never carried burdens that belonged to the Father. He trusted completely. And he invites us to do the same. Maybe that's the lesson someone listening needs today. Maybe you've been carrying something far too heavy. Maybe you've been trying to solve a problem that only God can solve. Maybe you've been trying to force an answer that only God can provide. Maybe you've been trying to open a door that only God can open. Maybe you've been exhausting yourself fighting battles that belong to Him. And today He's saying, give it to me. Not because He doesn't care, because He cares more than you do. Not because He doesn't understand, because He understands perfectly. Not because your burden is too small to matter, because no burden is too small for His attention. You see, surrender is not convincing God to care. Surrender is trusting that He already does. Think about a child walking beside a loving father. The child sees only a few feet ahead. The father sees the entire road. The child worries about obstacles. The father already knows how to navigate them. The child becomes afraid of uncertainty. The father remains calm because he understands what lies ahead. This is the relationship God invites us into. Not independent self-sufficiency, dependent trust. And that's difficult for many of us because our culture celebrates self-reliance. We're taught to figure everything out ourselves, handle everything ourselves, fix everything ourselves, manage everything ourselves. But spiritual maturity often looks like the opposite. It looks like increasing dependence upon God. The stronger your faith becomes, the more you realize how much you need Him. The wiser you become, the more you recognize your limitations. The closer you grow to God, the less pressure you feel to be your own savior. Because that's exhausting. You were never created to carry the world. You were never created to control the future. You were never created to hold everything together. Only God can do that. And He never asked you to take His place. David understood this deeply. That's why he could write these words after decades of experience. He had tried solving problems in his own strength. He had experienced consequences from acting impulsively. He had learned painful lessons about trusting his own understanding. But through it all, God taught him something priceless. Life works better when God carries what only God can carry. And perhaps nowhere is this more important than during seasons of waiting. Because waiting exposes what we truly trust. Anyone can trust God when answers arrive immediately. Anyone can trust God when prayers are answered quickly. Anyone can trust God when doors open easily. But what about when they don't? What about when the answer is delayed? What about when the breakthrough takes longer than expected? What about when you're doing everything right and nothing seems to be changing? That's where surrender becomes real. Because true surrender isn't just giving God your problems. It's giving Him your timeline. That's hard. Maybe one of the hardest things in the Christian life. We often trust God's power. We struggle to trust His timing. We believe He can do it. We're just not sure why He's waiting. Yet over and over again, Scripture reveals the same truth. God's delays are not God's denials. His timing may differ from yours, but His timing is never wrong. Think of Joseph. Years in prison before promotion. Think of David. Years of waiting before becoming king. Think of Abraham, years of waiting before receiving the promised son. Think of countless believers throughout history who discovered that God's timing, though often mysterious, was always purposeful. Waiting does not mean God is inactive. Waiting often means God is working where you cannot see. Beneath the surface, behind the scenes, in hidden places, repairing circumstances, shaping hearts, building character, aligning events, creating foundations. The seed buried in the ground appears inactive, yet beneath the soil, growth is already happening. Roots are forming, strength is developing, life is emerging, and eventually, what was hidden becomes visible. The breakthrough arrives. The answer appears. The door opens. The harvest comes. But none of that would happen without the hidden work first. Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you're in a season where nothing seems to be changing. Maybe you've prayed and still don't see results. Maybe you're tempted to believe God has forgotten you. If that's you, hear this clearly. Just because you can't see God working doesn't mean He isn't working. Just because the answer hasn't arrived doesn't mean it's not coming. Just because the breakthrough is delayed doesn't mean the promise is dead. God is often doing His deepest work in places you cannot yet see. And that's why surrender matters so much. Because surrender allows you to trust God's process even when you don't understand it. It allows you to rest while He works. It allows you to remain faithful while He prepares. It allows you to walk in peace while He writes the next chapter of your story. My friend, before this week begins, I want you to picture every burden you've been carrying. Every fear, every pressure, every uncertainty, every unanswered question, every outcome you're trying to control. Now imagine rolling that weight onto God's shoulders. Not temporarily, not halfway, completely. Because He is able, He is faithful, He is present, and He is strong enough to carry what is crushing you. There is a sentence hidden inside Psalm 37 that has carried believers through wars, through heartbreak, through uncertainty, through seasons of waiting, through financial struggles, through sickness, through unanswered prayers, and through moments when life seemed completely out of control. It is not a complicated sentence. It is not a long sentence. It is not a sentence that demands extraordinary talent, intelligence, or strength. Yet it may be one of the most difficult commands God ever gives us. David writes, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him." At first glance, those words seem gentle, simple, almost easy. But when life becomes chaotic, those words become one of the greatest challenges a believer can face. Because everything inside us wants to do the opposite. When uncertainty rises, we want to rush. When answers are delayed, we want to force solutions. When fear appears, we want to grab control. When circumstances don't make sense, we want to panic. When life feels unstable, we want to fix everything immediately. Yet God says, "Be still," not because He doesn't understand your situation, not because your concerns aren't real, not because your challenges don't matter, but because stillness creates space for trust. And trust is where peace is born. Think about the world we live in. Everything moves fast, faster than ever before. Information never stops. Notifications never stop. Opinions never stop. News never stops. Pressure never stops. Most people spend their entire lives reacting. Reacting to messages. Reacting to circumstances. Reacting to criticism. Reacting to problems. Reacting to fear. Reacting to uncertainty. Reacting to whatever happens around them. And because they're constantly reacting, they never experience true peace. Their emotions become controlled by circumstances. Their thoughts become controlled by headlines. Their confidence becomes controlled by outcomes. Their mood becomes controlled by whatever happens that day. But Psalm 37 offers another way, a higher way, a steadier way. David says, "Be still before the Lord." Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, "Be still before your problems." He doesn't say, "Be still before your fears." He doesn't say, "Be still before your circumstances." He says, "Be still before the Lord." That changes everything. Because stillness isn't found by staring at your problems. Stillness is found by focusing on God's presence. The more you stare at problems, the bigger they become. The more you stare at God, the smaller your fears become. This is one of the great secrets of spiritual peace. Peace is not the absence of problems. Peace is the presence of God. Many people are waiting for a peaceful life before they experience peace. But Scripture teaches the opposite. You experience peace first. Then you carry that peace into life's challenges. You don't wait for calm circumstances. You cultivate a calm heart. That's why Jesus could sleep during a storm. Think about that. The disciples were terrified. The wind was raging. The waves were crashing. The boat was filling with water. Experienced fishermen believed they might die. Yet Jesus slept. Not because the storm wasn't real. Not because danger didn't exist. But because his peace was greater than the storm surrounding him. And that same peace is available to you. Not someday. Well, today. Right now. In the middle of whatever you're facing. The phrase, "be still," carries a deeper meaning than most people realize. In Hebrew, it doesn't simply mean being physically quiet. It means letting go, relaxing your grip, ceasing your striving, releasing your need to control, surrendering your demand for immediate answers. In other words, God is saying, "Stop fighting battles I've already promised to handle." That's difficult because many of us have become addicted to striving. We feel productive when we're worried. We feel responsible when we're stressed. We feel useful when we're constantly thinking about problems. But often what we call responsibility is actually fear wearing a different disguise. Fear says, "What if everything falls apart?" Faith says, "What if God is already working?" Fear says, "I have to figure this out." Faith says, "God will guide me." Fear says, "I need answers right now." Faith says, "God's timing is trustworthy." Fear says, "I can't rest until everything is solved." Faith says, I can rest because God is still in control. And every day, we choose which voice we will believe. The truth is that anxiety and faith are constantly competing for the same space in your heart. The voice you feed becomes the voice that leads. If you continually feed fear, fear will grow stronger. If you continually feed faith, faith will grow stronger. This is why daily time with God matters so much. Not because God needs your attention, because you need His perspective. The world trains you to worry. God trains you to trust. The world trains you to hurry. God trains you to wait. The world trains you to react. God trains you to respond. The world trains you to depend on yourself. God trains you to depend on Him. And the difference between those two paths is enormous. One leads to exhaustion. The other leads to peace. One produces anxiety. The other produces confidence. One leaves you overwhelmed. The other leaves you anchored. Perhaps that's the word someone listening needs today. Anchored. Because that's exactly what David is describing. Stillness is not passivity. Stillness is being anchored. A ship anchored in a storm still feels the wind. It still experiences the waves. It still faces turbulence. But it does not drift away. Why? Because something stronger is holding it in place. That is what God's presence does for us. The storm may continue. The challenge may remain. The uncertainty may not disappear immediately. But when your soul is anchored in God, you stop drifting. You stop being tossed around by every fear. You stop being controlled by every circumstance. You remain steady. And there is tremendous power in that kind of steadiness. Because when you are steady, you make better decisions. When you are steady, you hear God's voice more clearly. When you are steady, you respond with wisdom instead of reacting with emotion. When you are steady, you become a source of strength for other people. Have you ever noticed how some people seem calm no matter what's happening around them? It's not because they have easier lives. It's not because they have fewer problems. It's because they've learned where to place their trust. Their peace doesn't come from circumstances. Their peace comes from God. And because circumstances didn't create their peace, circumstances cannot take it away. That kind of peace becomes a testimony. People notice it, not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because calmness is rare in a frantic world. When everyone else is panicking and you're steady, people notice. When everyone else is reacting and you're grounded, people notice. When everyone else is consumed by fear and you're walking in faith, people notice. And often, without realizing it, you become evidence of God's faithfulness. David then adds another phrase. Wait patiently for Him. This may be even harder than stillness, because most of us don't mind trusting God. We just want Him to work faster. We don't mind waiting a little. We just don't want to wait long. We want answers immediately. Breakthroughs immediately. Healing immediately. Provision immediately. Direction immediately. But God often works differently. And here's why. Because God cares about who you're becoming as much as where you're going. We focus on destinations, God focuses on transformation. We focus on outcomes. God focuses on character. We focus on arrival. God focuses on growth. And growth takes time. Think about a tree. A mighty oak does not grow overnight. It develops slowly, year after year, season after season, storm after storm. Its roots go deeper. Its trunk grows stronger. Its foundation becomes more secure. And eventually it becomes capable of standing through storms that would destroy smaller trees. Your spiritual life works the same way. The waiting season is not wasted. The waiting season is training. Every day you choose faith over fear, you're growing. Every day you choose trust over control, you're growing. Every day you choose peace over panic, you're growing. Every day you choose stillness over striving, you're growing. And often you don't even realize it's happening until you look back and see how much God has changed you. Think about the person you were 5 years ago. The things that used to shake you. The fears that used to control you. The problems that once felt overwhelming. Many of them no longer have the same power. Why? Because God has been growing you, strengthening you, teaching you, refining you, preparing you. The waiting was never empty. God was working the entire time. That's why patience is not passive. Patience is active trust. Patience says, I don't understand everything, but I trust God. Patience says, I don't see the whole picture, but I trust God. Patience says, I don't know when the answer will come, but I trust God. Patience says, I don't know how this story ends, but I trust the author. That kind of trust changes a person. It removes pressure. It removes panic. It removes the exhausting need to have everything figured out. And perhaps that's exactly what God wants for you before this week begins. Not more information, not more strategies, not more plans, more trust. Because trust produces peace, and peace produces clarity, and clarity produces wise action. The order matters. Most people seek action first. God invites you to seek peace first, because decisions made from panic are rarely wise. Words spoken from fear are rarely helpful. Choices made from anxiety often create more problems. But when your heart is still, wisdom can enter. When your mind is quiet, God's direction becomes easier to recognize. When your spirit is at rest, faith becomes stronger than fear. My friend, as you prepare for the days ahead, there will be moments when anxiety tries to return. Moments when uncertainty rises. Moments when circumstances tempt you to panic. Moments when you feel the urge to control what only God can control. When those moments come, remember David's words. Return to them. Meditate on them. Pray them. Live them. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Not frantic, not desperate, not reactive. Still, anchored, grounded, steady, because God is not confused. God is not worried. God is not rushing. God is not surprised. And the God who holds the universe together is fully capable of holding your life together as well. There is a quiet battle that many faithful people fight, but few ever talk about. It isn't always a battle against fear. It isn't always a battle against temptation. Sometimes it's a battle against discouragement. The discouragement that comes from doing the right thing while watching others get ahead by doing the wrong thing. The discouragement that comes from being faithful while feeling forgotten. The discouragement that comes from waiting on God while watching other people seem to receive everything you've been praying for. If you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. In fact, that struggle is one of the central themes of Psalm 37. David understood it deeply. He had lived long enough to witness a reality that troubles many believers. Sometimes wicked people prosper. Sometimes dishonest people succeed. Sometimes selfish people advance. Sometimes those who cut corners appear to move ahead faster than those who walk in integrity. And if we're honest, that can be difficult to understand. You work hard. You remain faithful. You try to honor God. You try to make wise decisions. You try to treat people with kindness and respect. Yet it seems like others are moving ahead while you're still waiting. And somewhere deep inside, a dangerous question begins to form. What's the point? What's the point of integrity if dishonesty seems to pay? What's the point of patience if shortcuts seem faster? What's the point of faithfulness if nobody notices? What's the point of trusting God if the waiting never seems to end? David speaks directly into that struggle. He says, "Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes." Notice again how often David repeats that phrase. Do not fret. Do not fret. Do not fret. Why? Because he knows how easily comparison can poison the soul. Comparison is one of the fastest ways to lose your peace. The moment you start measuring your journey against someone else's, gratitude begins to disappear. Contentment begins to fade. Joy begins to weaken. Trust begins to erode. And before long, your eyes are no longer fixed on God. They're fixed on everyone else. Social media has made this even harder. Every day we're exposed to carefully edited versions of other people's lives. We see promotions, announcements, achievements, success stories, highlight reels. And if we're not careful, we begin believing that everyone else is moving forward while we're standing still. But here's something important to remember. You are comparing your behind-the-scenes reality to someone else's highlight reel. You are comparing your unfinished chapter to someone else's edited story. And that comparison is rarely accurate. More importantly, it isn't helpful. Because God has never called you to run someone else's race. He has called you to run yours. Think about that. God is not comparing your life to the person next to you. He's not comparing your journey to theirs. He's not evaluating your faithfulness based on their progress. He's looking at your heart, your obedience, your trust, your faithfulness, your willingness to follow him one step at a time. That means someone else's success does not diminish your future. Someone else's blessing does not reduce God's ability to bless you. Someone else's opportunity does not cancel your purpose. God's resources are not limited. His plans are not threatened. His promises are not weakened because someone else got ahead. The problem begins when we forget that. The problem begins when we start measuring success the way the world measures success. The world measures success by visibility. God measures success by faithfulness. The world celebrates achievement. God celebrates obedience. The world rewards performance. God rewards character. The world looks at appearance. God looks at the heart. And those are very different scoreboards. Imagine standing before God at the end of your life. Do you think his first question will be, how many people followed you? How much money did you make? How impressive were your accomplishments? No. The question that echoes throughout Scripture is much simpler. Were you faithful? Did you trust me? Did you obey me? Did you walk with me? Did you love people? Did you use what I gave you wisely? That's the scoreboard that matters. And understanding that changes everything. Because suddenly you stop chasing recognition. You stop chasing validation. You stop chasing applause. You stop trying to prove yourself. Instead, you focus on faithfulness. And faithfulness is something no one can take from you. David continues by offering one of the most beautiful promises in the entire psalm. He says, "He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun." What a remarkable promise. Notice what David does not say. He doesn't say your reward will come immediately. He doesn't say everyone will recognize your value right away. He doesn't say you'll never be misunderstood. Instead, he says your righteousness will shine like the dawn. Think about dawn for a moment. The sun doesn't appear all at once. It rises gradually, slowly, patiently, steadily. At first, darkness seems dominant. At first, nothing appears to be changing. At first, the horizon looks almost the same. But little by little, light begins to emerge. And eventually, what seemed hidden becomes impossible to ignore. That's often how God works. His timing is rarely instant, but it is always precise. Many people abandon their faithfulness because they want immediate results. They quit too soon. They give up too early. They walk away before the dawn arrives. But God is calling you to stay faithful, even when no one notices, even when recognition doesn't come, even when progress feels slow, even when the waiting feels long. Because faithfulness always matters. Always. Every prayer prayed in secret. Every act of kindness nobody saw. Every sacrifice nobody appreciated. Every moment of obedience nobody applauded. God sees it all. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is forgotten. Nothing escapes his attention. That truth becomes incredibly important during seasons of waiting. Because waiting often creates the illusion that nothing is happening. You pray and nothing seems to change. You trust and nothing seems to move. You remain faithful and nothing seems to happen. But appearances can be deceiving. A farmer understands this. After planting seeds, the field looks unchanged for a while. Day after day, Week after week, nothing visible, nothing dramatic, nothing exciting. Yet beneath the surface, growth is occurring. Roots are forming. Life is developing. Preparation is happening. The harvest is coming. The farmer doesn't dig up the seed every day to check on its progress. He trusts the process. And that's exactly what faith requires. Trusting God's process. Even when you cannot see immediate evidence. Even when growth remains hidden. Even when answers seem delayed. Trusting that God is working beneath the surface. Because He often is. In fact, some of God's most important work happens in hidden places. The character nobody sees. The humility nobody applauds. The patience nobody celebrates. The trust developed during long seasons of waiting. Those hidden victories often prepare us for visible blessings. And here's something many people never realize. Sometimes the delay is protection. Sometimes God waits because He's preparing you. Sometimes He waits because He's preparing the opportunity. Sometimes He waits because He sees dangers you cannot see. Sometimes He waits because the blessing you're asking for requires growth you're still developing. God sees the entire picture. You see one chapter. God sees the whole story. And because He sees the whole story, His timing can be trusted. Even when it feels slow. Even when it feels confusing. Even when it feels unfair. One of the greatest examples of this principle is Joseph. Imagine being Joseph. You receive a dream from God, a promise, a glimpse of your future, and then everything falls apart. You're betrayed by your brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, thrown into prison, forgotten. Year after year passes. From a human perspective, it looks like the promise is failing. It looks like God has forgotten. It looks like faithfulness isn't working. But God was working the entire time. Every setback was preparation. Every delay had purpose. Every disappointment was shaping the man who would eventually step into his calling. And when the time finally came, everything made sense. Not because the journey was easy, but because God had been faithful all along. Perhaps you're living in a Joseph season right now. A season where the promise feels delayed. A season where the waiting feels long. A season where faithfulness feels difficult. If so, hear this. God has not forgotten you. Your story is not over. Your waiting is not wasted. Your faithfulness is not invisible.